I discovered this sub while with my friend Julia, who is with me as I'm typing this out, because we just got back from a camping trip where we experienced the scariest thing either of us has ever experienced. So Julia and I are both women in our early 20s, and we were out camping in a remote area of Montana that isn't super popular, but it's still fairly popular amongst locals who camp a lot like we do, which meant it wasn't super unusual when we saw a group of 3 guys who looked to be a little older than us drive past our camp about an hour after we set up our chairs and table. We just assumed that they were searching for a good spot to camp, but then, when the car was still in our sight, through the trees, we saw it turn around, and as it was driving back, we both noticed one of the guys sticking his phone out the window and seemed to be recording us. Both of us thought it was really weird, and I walked a bit closer to take a picture of the license plate as a safety measure, but when I got closer I saw that the back plate had all the numbers covered with black paint. Julia and I both got bad vibes from this, but both of us are aware that men are creeps towards women all the time. And both of us are prepared with bear spray because Montana is grizzly bear country, and we decided it wasn't a weird enough interaction to pack our stuff and find a different spot. We just decided to put up an empty tent outside and sleep in my car instead, to trick people into thinking we were sleeping in the tent if they tried to attack us. Later that night, when both of us were asleep in my car, we heard branches rustling and snapping outside by the empty tent, despite the fact that it wasn't windy. Originally, we assumed it was a bear trying to climb up to the bear hang with our food and scented hygiene products. Then we heard male voices outside, and I lifted my head up to the window and saw the same car that passed us earlier. I got off the air mattress on top of the back row seats that we put down to make an area for us to sleep, and locked the doors individually so my car wouldn't make a beeping noise. Julia and I stayed still and hoped that the men would leave. For a while we heard them talking, but it was hard to make out what they said from inside the car. We heard more rustling and branches snapping, which made us think that they were trying to steal something from the bear hang, which was weird, but neither of us wanted to actually look out the window in case one of them spotted us. Eventually, we heard the car leave, which was a huge relief, but we were too freaked out to actually leave the car until it was light outside and the campers nearby would be waking up. When I got out, nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. Above our tent, the man had hung a dead deer that was obviously killed recently, because it was leaking blood everywhere on top of our tent. The internal organs were ripped out and its limbs were cut off and laid out in a circle around the tent. This is messed up on its own, but hunting permits aren't even being sold right now, which means that the deer was killed illegally to do whatever it is that those guys did. As soon as we processed what we were looking at, Julia and I freaked out and drove away without taking down our camp. Once we were in service, Julia called the police and Forest Service to report what happened while I drove home. Forest Service was nice enough to get our stuff for us, but I don't even want mine back, in case there's like some weird curse on it or something. The police are looking into it to charge a fine for killing wild game during the off-season. But as far as I know, what they did to us technically isn't illegal, it's just really creepy. I haven't heard of anything like this before, but if you have, let me know. I am very curious and very spooked. I love camping so much, but after this, I don't know if I can camp for a long time. I'd like to begin by describing myself, because I believe it's relevant to the story. I have to assume that I'm not the average author here. I'm 25, male, and a bit above average height. I have been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school: gym, running, CrossFit, squash, swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of the summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few ascents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature, with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Saturday, more specifically because it would have been my granddad's birthday, and he also loved hiking before he died. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people, as they are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not-so-distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me in on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year, and she doesn't enjoy long-distance walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work on short notice, so I knew from the moment I woke up I would be doing the hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal. I barely broke a sweat, and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6 to 7 people during the first 2 to 3 hours, and most of them were cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study some animal tracks. There are deer and wild boars in these woods, nothing more menacing, not animals anyway, but I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest, and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars seldom go here. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older green SUV with a fresh registration. You can tell by the license plate. Probably an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see two men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had a stubble beard game going on as well. I assumed they were gamekeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things. I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have jeeps, which are more suitable for the forest. Still, I felt no discomfort, and again, I thought nothing of it. Then my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking in the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at the trees and whatnot. Then I suddenly had a strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. An engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point, the trail was quite narrow, but if, for whatever reason, you'd want to drive a car on it, you could, just about. Now when I turned around, the aforementioned SUV was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver, who was staring back, as I can only assume, as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him,
"What's wrong? Should I let you go?"
in a polite tone, as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car and the engine stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and began walking towards my destination at a much faster pace than before. Now I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer, and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again, or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water, as I usually do, I decided to take this. I saw a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail that led quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I don't know what they are called in English. Wooden structures, couple meters tall, very simple, where hunters can sit and wait for their prey. I walked over to the tower, put my bag down by the ladder that led up, and began checking. I was also interested in checking Google Maps to see where I was, but since there was no signal, I decided to check my map. I also had a sip of water. I had been camping there for a good few minutes before I headed back at the trail from where I deviated to take a leak. Right before I arrived back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it was. No wind, no noise of any kind. Absolutely nothing. This made me realize just a moment later how alone I was. Except for the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on that trail, since the small one to the tower was well hidden by the trees and you couldn't see the main trail, as it was running perpendicularly to the small one. I looked at him and I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing with a baseball hat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked on along the trail, thinking he's a hunter. However, in the light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in the woods this time of year. I figured in the matter of 2 seconds that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, toward and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, it's the best call I will have ever made. And for fuck's sake, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through the branches, small trees, and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails, but didn't even bother to look either way. My pulse was a billion the whole time. I began checking my phone for a signal, but nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while, I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me too seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Well, I'll let you decide for yourselves if I did or did not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to the station near my car, rather anxiously. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing. She must have felt that something shook me up. I spent the afternoon contemplating my life in the bathtub. The boots destroyed my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for large periods of time. I called the forest's gamekeeper's office. I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I came across. They do not. Their gamekeepers also don't typically work in pairs. Like 99.9% of the time, they are alone. I told them my story, and they took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they assured me that the police wouldn't. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during summer either. I've been reading local news, but nothing extraordinary has been reported yet. I really hope nothing will be reported either. Gentlemen in the empty forest at lunchtime, let's not meet again. Hello, I'm French, so I apologize in advance if I make any mistakes. As I just said, I live in France, and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended. I was and am still 19 at the time. After the lockdown ended, I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks. I got tested before and no problems there. My grandparents lives in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite a big dog. When I was really young, I lived at my grandparents for a year, and at that time the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy in French, which kinda means like devil in English, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there, I played with her a lot. We are both really close, and that will have its importance later. Two of my hobbies are having long walks and running. Thus, every evening I was going out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest. Then there's a small hill, and on top of that, a big place with lots of fields there. I run there a lot, so I know the place. The air is fresh and the view is quite beautiful. So I was going there with the dog every day. It was also helping my grandparents to have her doing lots of exercise. The first time we went there, nothing special happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It's about 6 to 7 kilometers, so basically an hour walk. The next day, when we arrived on the top of the hill, in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m., but there was still some light because it's summer. There was 3 other persons walking in the fields. They were younger than me, probably about 15 to 16. I also noticed they were smoking, so my guess was that they used to come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We went past them, I greeted them, and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special there. For a whole week, I did this walk around the same time, 10 p.m., and passed by those 3 guys with nothing special happening, and it was perfectly fine to me this way. The second week, as usually, I went for the walk with a dog, Chippy, and arrived at the fields. There was only one of those 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time though. When he saw me, I was at the entrance of the field, just after the little hill climb. So the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually had in my pocket. I told him, yeah, sure. So he walked to me, the hand in the pockets of his hoodie. When he came near, for some reasons, I felt a shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instincts knows there's a problem, but you don't listen to it because nothing looks weird to you. I handed over the lighter when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast move with his hand coming from his hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I just had a reflex of throwing myself back, so hard that I fell down, and I just realized that it was a knife he was holding, and he just tried to stab me. What saved me is my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him and he fell down. As I said before, it's a really big dog. I immediately got up on my feet. I heard something in my back. From the entrance of the forest, I saw two guys wearing animal masks running to me. They were probably the two friends. In this moment, your brain acts yourself. You don't think at all. And in this case, the answer he found was really simple. The other guy was still on the ground. I just watched my dog and told her.
Run!
I started running and she followed me, but I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up as well.
Catch him! Don't let him go!
At this moment I was totally terrified. I was just running. I was hearing them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long will they follow me? Who the hell are they? This was the first time I was really happy to be a runner. I was clearly better than those guys, and that totally saved me, because they chased for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest. This time it's a descent with a road at the end. I heard the steps of the three guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked myself up. I caught a big breath and gave a huge hug to my dog. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents. We called the police, but they didn't find anyone. I don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal masks really made me think about some kind of Satanists. I really don't want to know anyway. I still do long walks with Chippy, the hero dog, but I now go earlier and to places with a little more people. I hope you enjoyed my story. I apologize again if I made any mistakes. And to the three guys in the forest, let's not ever meet again. A couple of summers ago, my girlfriend and I were camping in Chequamequin National Forest in northern Wisconsin. And after our experience, we do not plan to return unless we go with a large group of people. My girlfriend and I are from Chicago, so northern Wisconsin was our go-to place for R&R. We've done a number of hiking trips in northern Wisconsin and in the UP, but never to this area. We are not backpacking experts, but we have been to a number of national parks and have been out hiking and exploring when we can find time away from work. We love getting away from people and relaxing in nature, but this trip made us appreciate the presence of other people around us in unfamiliar places. Our plan was to hike a remote section of the North Country Trail. The North Country Trail is a national scenic trail like the Appalachian Trail, but it gets much less use. In some parts of northern Wisconsin, the trail is very remote and the only access is via logging roads. We planned to hike 15 miles along the trail to a backpack shelter, spend the night, and hike back to the car the following day. We spent the night at a friend's house in Warsaw, and we set out early the next day to the trailhead. As we entered the national forest boundary, we were captivated by the beauty of the thick green forests. I drove slowly along the gravel logging roads as we made our way to our parking spot. While we were driving to the trailhead, we passed a couple of people standing next to a parked truck on the side of the road. They appeared to be hillbillies, as they had a rusted-out, bunged-up pickup truck, complete with Confederate bumper stickers. As we drove past, I waved, and they stared back without returning the greeting. Friendly people, I thought to myself. After we passed them, I looked in the rear-view mirror and noticed they were still staring at us. And before we rounded a bend, I glanced back into the mirror again and saw them watching us through the haze of road dust. My girlfriend and I joked about the up north people, but we did not think anything of the encounter. Aside from those people, we did not encounter anyone else on the remote logging roads within the national forest boundary. We found the trailhead about 15 minutes later, after winding our way on the narrow logging road. There was no one else parked at the trailhead, a perfect chance to get some needed solitude, fresh air, and relaxation. After parking and making sure the car was locked, we hoisted our packs and set off on the trail. The weather was relatively cool, which thankfully kept the mosquitoes and biting flies at bay. We took pictures along the way, and we marveled at the lushness of the forest and the topography of the glacial moraine. After a solid 8 hours of hiking, we found our campsite. It consisted of a wooden backpack shelter and a fire ring. Even though the shelter provided ample space for us, we opted to set up our tent in a small clearing about 100 feet behind the shelter. We built a fire at the shelter fire ring, and I boiled water for our hydrated trail food. As we ate, we watched the sky slowly turn dark. My girlfriend and I passed around a Nalgene filled with wine, and we marveled at how many stars you could see away from the city. When the fire was reduced to a small pile of glowing embers, we decided to head back to the tent. We settled into our tent and looked through the pictures we took that day. But after lugging a heavy pack for 15 miles and drinking some wine, I was ready for some shut-eye. When we camped at state and national parks, I usually wore earplugs, but that night there were no RVs or other campers to make noise, so I closed my eyes and let the noise of the forest lull me to sleep. My girlfriend was very uneasy that night, but she normally had some apprehension whenever we were sleeping away from home. I'm not sure when we drifted to sleep, but we awoke to a bone-chilling noise. It was pitch dark outside, and over the insects in the forest, I heard a dull thud. It sounded like someone was hitting two logs together. My girlfriend and I were wide awake at this point, and we lay silently in our tent, hearing the noise again. Our old tent had a mesh window, but the backpacking tent we were using had no window. We could only guess at what was making the noise outside our tent. We initially thought that an animal got at our food and garbage bag, which we had left in the shelter, but the noise was too distinct, and it did not sound like rustling through food wrappers or our camp equipment. Our hearts were pounding as we heard the persistent knock in the darkness. Unarmed and scared shitless, we did not know what to do. I would normally have carried a can of bear spray, but I decided to leave it at home to save on weight, against the wishes of my girlfriend. The knocking continued, but we remained still as to not give away our location. For all we knew, whatever was making the noise had already spotted our tent. After what seemed like an eternity, the knocking sound ceased. We lay in complete silence, with only the dull buzz of the insects in the background. Then we heard it, leaves rustling, a branch breaking, voices. We heard low talking in the distance. We could not make out what was being said, but it sounded like a couple of people talking in the distance. The voices continued for a bit, but to our relief, the voices did not seem to be getting louder. Whoever was out there did not spot the tent or decided to leave us alone. We sat in our tent for the rest of the night, adrenaline surging through our veins. At the first light, we slowly got out of the tent. I looked around in all directions to see if anyone was out there, but I only saw the forest and the backpack shelter. We quickly rolled up our sleeping bags and camp pads and put our tent away. When we got to the shelter, my girlfriend screamed in horror. On the entrance to the shelter, the wood was freshly cut. The word "kill" was cut into the shelter wall, and there were a number of axe, knife cuts, where someone was chopping at the wall. I looked at the ground and saw a scattering of fresh wood splinters. After grabbing our food supply and garbage bag, we got the hell out of there. We were nearly jogging with our gear as we made our way back to the car. I kept glancing back over my shoulder and gazing out through the woods to see if anyone was following us. We traversed the glacial eskers that we saw the day before, and we knew we were getting closer to our car. We were quietly rejoicing as we neared the trailhead. We made it back to the trailhead in near record time, but something was wrong. The windshield wiper on my car was sticking straight up, and there was something stuck to the wiper. As we inched closer to the car, I saw there was blood smeared on the windshield, and a squirrel carcass was impaled on the wiper blade. Hair and blood still stuck to the wiper and on the hood of the car. I didn't bother cleaning off the car. We threw our gear into the trunk, and I sped off without removing the animal from the wiper blade. As I sped down the gravel logging road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, but I could not see anything through the cloud of road dust behind the car. When we got to the gas station by the nearest town, I removed the carcass with a wad of newspaper, and I tried to remove as much dried blood as I could. I filled up on gas, and we didn't stop. until we made it to Milwaukee. This was the last trip I took to the woods of northern Wisconsin. Wow, you made it to the end. Thank you very much for listening. If you like the podcast, please do give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and maybe even subscribe. I post on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays.